flight certification,
Flight
Information. Certification.
flight information
flight
Certification information. Certification information. Certification certification. Flight
Information, certification,
flight pilots, certification,
information, pilots,
flight pilots certification pilots flight
information, pilots,
pilots information flight pilots flight information certification pilots flight
certification, pilots, information,
certification, flight certification,
certification, pilots,
flight information pilots
information,
Pilots.
information flight information flight
information
certification
pilots flight pilots
certification,
information
certification of
flight
certification,
certification
pilots
pilots and
certification, information,
certification
information, pilots,
information
Certification.
certification
The information.
information,
And information.
information
pilots
information
pilots
flight pilots certification flight
Pilot certification or pilots
information pilots
fly certification, flight
information, certification, information,
pilots certification, pilots flight pilots,
information
pilots
certification,
certification or
pilots,
information
pilots flight
pilots information flight
pilot.